not technically a light sport, but it's made by the same company, the Technam, whatever it is. I've actually flown in it. It's a dinky little airplane. It's fun, but in aviation, when it's like, hey, this is a certified part for a certified aircraft, it's already like 10 times more expensive.
Yeah.
Right. You can have either a private pilot's license or a sport license if that's where you start or where you want to stay. So now the planes are kind of like a 150, but they have like usually 2 or 3 glass panels in them. So super nice.
So, Katie, thank you so much for coming to hang out and fly with Trent and share some of your experience and wisdom with the community. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So, you came across my radar screen or my feed. I don't remember how or when, maybe somebody brought you to my attention, but what really stood out was the method that you used to go and get your ratings using the light sport route. And since I watched whatever it was that I watched, I've actually been chatting it up a little bit with my audience, but I really wanted to have you here so they could hear it from you, sort of firsthand. So, first off, taking the route that you took, what did you spend to get all the ratings that you needed, and how many and which ratings were those?
Yeah, so I kind of went into aviation with the mindset of I just love to fly. I'm not sure if I want to immediately get to an airline. I just want to have a decent quality of life and work as a pilot. So I wanted to do it without any debt because of that.
Hmm.
And I ended up spending under $35,000. I have ATP single and multi-engine. I have CFI, CFII, MEI, commercial seaplane, and commercial drone. So pretty much everything you would need, at this point to work as a professional pilot in whatever capacity you choose for under 35 grand is pretty good.
That's phenomenal. So we're going to dive into a lot more detail on that today. But just so that folks know sort of where you're at now, you're a medevac pilot. You fly a jet, is that right?
I fly the Pilatus PC-12, so we do all single pilot IFR in that fun little airplane. We go into a lot of little backcountry mountain strips, and we service the Pacific Northwest. A lot of people that don't have access to like tier one trauma, and normally take them to a hospital that can give them a better level of care.
Okay. And for those who are curious about that line of work, what are the minimums to be able to qualify for that?
This job has a 2,500 hour minimum. There's a couple other sub requirements for insurance, but that is, I think, the hard line for single pilot IFR in this particular aircraft. Other jobs, like if you want to just start medevac, a lot of them will hire SIC at a lot lower time. Normally, the PIC is going to be, somewhere in the 2,500 or 3,000 hour for that kind of a job.
Okay, terrific. So now what I want to do is I want to go back in time and unpack your story of how you went from zero to the 2,500 hours that allowed you to get your job. And we're going to talk a lot about your light sport route along the way. So let's begin with explaining what's a light sport for people that don't know what it is.
Yeah, so a light sport is basically just a normal airplane. It just has to be under 1,320 pounds max gross. So Technam Eaglets, Piper makes a really good airplane in this category. They're normally like the Piper Cub is what we used to think of, like the PA-11 or something like that.
Yeah.
But they've become a lot more advanced recently because a lot of people may not want to go through the whole medical process, or maybe they want to let their medical expire and just fly on a driver's license. So now the planes are kind of like a 150, but they have like usually 2 or 3 glass panels in them. So super nice. They're just light, but super fun to fly. A lot of them will have like the G3X before it was certified within the Technam Eaglets and Bravos. And they're really good airplanes. It's not the kind of thing that we used to think of where you have like, the instructor in the back without a radio and it's like really rudimentary. So
Yeah, I've seen one at the local airport, and they're awfully nice. It's not the largest cockpit in the world, but you are side by side with your instructor, and you've got a stick in between the legs, and you've got the glass panels, and it seems pretty darn nice. And most of them, I think, are running on a Rotax engine or something like that, so the fuel consumption is definitely on the low side. Is that right?
yeah, no, a lot of them were the Rotax 912 or the Rotax 914. Again, like super capable engine. Those are used in a lot of different planes now. They run on avgas or MOGAS a lot of times, so cheaper fuel, and then they don't use a whole lot of fuel. So a lot of lower operating costs that go into them overall. And then, of course, they're not a certified airplane, so it doesn't have to be an AMPIA doing all the work on it. You can have a light sport mechanic, so that saves a lot of money. And then we know that, in aviation, when it's like, hey, this is a certified part for a certified aircraft, it's already like 10 times more expensive.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that is kind of avoided as well. But also, the whole thing is overseen by the FAA. So it's still safe. It's still regulated. It's not like the Wild West of aviation, but it's just allowing people to have access to aviation in a cheaper way, essentially.
Yeah. Plus, you don't have to fly around in 50-year-old airplanes.
Yeah, they're newer. Like, I mean, that's the thing is like a lot of the planes that we see at the flight schools are like from the 1950s or 60s.
Yeah.
And then we have this light sport that's brand new, it has all this glass cockpit in there. And it's like, I mean, kind of fun to use that. That the ones I flew had like full ADSB, on the screen way before ADSB was a thing. So they were pretty decent little airplanes.
So, ironically enough, you're in the same town as I am. Did
Yep.
you, which because most of my interviewees are not. So, I don't know of anybody here locally that trains in a light sport. So, how does one go and get the training? So, the first stop is obviously the private pilot's license.
Hmm.
And the really cool thing about, and I'm going to sort of let the cat out of the bag so people keep wanting to hear the rest of the story is you can become, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you can become a CFI without a commercial rating and without an instrument rating right after your private pilot's license is done. Is that right?
That is correct. And a lot of people have said that this is BS and that I'm lying. So I have put together a guide that has all the CFRs in there. It is completely legal. I mean, I would never do anything illegal or
Yeah.
unsafe in aviation, as all of us, strive to do. But you can have either a private pilot's license or a sport license if that's where you start or where you want to stay. And then 150 hours of total time. You have to take the FOI, the Fundamentals of Instruction written test, and you have to take the Light Sport CFI written test. And then you take a check ride with a light sport DPE
Yep.
and you're an instructor. And you don't have to have a commercial, you don't have to have an instrument, and that's it. You still can be compensated to fly, which is, crazy. People think, well, isn't that the point of the commercial rating? But this is from the FAA. I don't make the rules. We're just kind of letting people know about them, to use them to their advantage.
And that is the silver bullet, the biggest reason why I wanted to do this interview, because so often across my social media platforms, I'm getting asked if Trent, should I go to ATP or how much should I spend or what's the difference between part 41 and part 61 and how do I get the costs down and where can I get a student loan? And in going the way that you did, so you spent roughly how much to get your private pilot's license? And also, how did you find? So I guess it's really a two-part question. How did you find a school that would train you in a light sport?
Yeah, so I probably spent around between 12 and 13,000 on my private. So that's pretty typical.
Yep.
I started in 2017, so it probably was a little cheaper back then anyways. But now, I mean, I think people can get a private for 15 grand, if they do it in a reasonable amount of time. So that was where I started off. I was in the military. I was a field artillery officer, and my dad was an A-10 pilot, and he kind of just said, "Hey, get your, pilot's license. If you hate it, you hate it, but it still looks good on a resume." So I just did it for fun. And then I was living in Florida and I just happened to find this light sports school that was in Florida. And I tend to be the kind of person that will go to the airport and talk to people,
Mhm.
which I tell a lot of younger people. I'm like, aviation is very old school. Get face to face, make it, you're the easiest person to hire, is the one that you walk in with your paper resume, give it to them, follow up, and so forth. So I did that whole thing, found this light sports school, and they're really the ones that explained it to me. They were like, you can finish your, I didn't even have my private at that point. I was about to take my check ride. And they told me, or you can finish your private, then you can come over here. You can fly our airplanes. We'll give it to you at cost, which I think was $40 an hour for the airplanes.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and so then I went from, I think I was at 75 or 80 hours when I took my private pilot check ride because I moved around a lot. And, that's pretty typical, anyways, for people to be well over 40 hours. And then they kind of opened the door for me and said, if you will work here for 6 months, we will, give you the planes at the instructor rate. And then I, went right through the time building, took the check ride, and then worked for them for about a year before moving on. And I mean, I flew a ton. I think I had like 700 hours when I left after that year. So they really set me up for success.
Yeah, no kidding. All right. So to summarize that, private pilot's license about $15,000, call it
Hmm.
50 hours, 40 hours, 45 to 70 hours ish for the
Yeah.
average Joe. At that point, you then had a time build, which you did at cost. until you got to 150 hours. Once you got to 150 hours, you could take your CFI check ride. Is that correct?
Hmm.
Okay. And at that point in time, when you pass that CFI check ride, you now can go and teach other people and you can start making money as a pilot. So that's that is a fraction of the cash that someone is going to spend who, for example, went the route that I went. Now, granted, I did it fast, so I did it for a little bit less, but the average Joe is going to spend significantly more money to be able to start making money as a flight instructor.
Yep, exactly. And then the other thing is when you start working in aviation, the world just opens up to you. So I tell people like if they even just can get a desk job at an FBO, and people want to help people in aviation. We all had people along the way that would be like, "Hey, let me give you your high performance sign off for free," or whatever it may be. And I do that now for younger pilots as well because we just love aviation. We want people to get into it without it just destroying their life financially or them ending up hating it because it's been such a negative experience. So if you really make it easy for people to work in aviation, it just opens up. And that was kind of what happened as well. Is I was now working as an instructor, and then people would be like, "Hey, I need a right seat for this. I need that," and you just are always available and say yes to everything.
Hmm.
And then I went and started to get my other ratings at night or whenever I had time off. And so I would go to another flight school next door and I would just do the minimum. So 15 hours with a double I for the instrument, that's it.
Hmm.
A lot of people have commented, they're like, that's unsafe. It must have been a bad level of training. And I'm like, well, my proficiency was pretty high. When I was flying 5 hours a day with students, you got to be ahead of the airplane. And I was doing that. And so then me hopping in and doing 15 hours and in the Orlando, class Bravo with my instructor was not that big of a deal for me,
Hmm.
and we all have to pass the same check rides. So, the DPE is going to hold you to a certain standard. If you do it for a lot of money, that doesn't necessarily mean you're getting a higher level of training, So,
Oh, I can't even tell you the amount of troll comments that I've received from people who've told me that I am flat out incompetent because I got
yeah.
7 readings in 91 days, and there's no possible way that I could have any skills whatsoever because all of the information was crammed into my head far too quickly for it to stick, and so it must have all just fallen back out again. And every time I see that, I just roll my eyes and I think, "Hey, man, I passed the check ride that
Hmm.
everybody else passed, and that means in the eyes of the FAA, I am proficient and I am capable." Just it's never ending.
Yeah, and just to add to that, the job I did after this was I was a government contractor for initial flight training and screening for the Air Force. So we took brand new Air Force lieutenants and we had them flying around Colorado in the summer by themselves at 35 hours, later. And then they also go through UPT after that. They get out of there with like less than 100 hours and they're flying jets around. So it's not necessarily the number of hours, and it depends a lot on the individual, their competency, how much work they're willing to put in. But if you can pass the check ride, you can pass the check ride. So that's I totally agree with you on that one. I think it's really funny that people get so up in arms about it. And it's like, hey, this is why we have the standards.
I know why that it is because they weren't able to achieve that standard. So therefore it is impossible in their
Yeah.
minds. And so the fact that you or someone else were able to do it makes them look bad. So they're going to try and make you look bad by being a troll on your social media. But, to each their own. So the government contractor thing, let's dive into that a little bit because I found that really interesting too. So how did that gig come around and what did that look like? And actually, hold on. Before we do that, as a CFI teaching other people in light sports, were you making roughly the same wages as a quote unquote regular CFI in a certified aircraft would be making?
Yeah, so I believe this flight school paid their full CFIs $3 an hour more. So I think at the time I made $27 an hour, which for 2017 was pretty standard.
Yeah,
And then actually, it was actually kind of better, than what a lot of people were making because I've heard even like $15 an hour some places, which is insane to me.
mind blowing.
Yeah, but I was making $27 an hour. The full CFIs, the CFIAs were making $30 an hour. So, pretty much the same. But other CFIs at other schools in Orlando were making less than that, at 141 schools because they kind of were just in that pipeline. So I think I was pretty fairly compensated for that time.
And obviously your multi-engine rating, you're not getting that in a light sport because, well, I mean, I guess you could. Is the Technum a multi-engine light sport?
It's not technically a light sport, but it's made by the same company, the Tecnam, whatever it is. I've actually flown in it. It's a dinky little airplane. It's fun, but Yeah, but I think I did my multi in an Apache or something like that, just years later.
So the other ratings that you got, the double I, were you able to do that in light sport as well, or did you do that in a more in a traditional certified aircraft?
Everything else I did in certified aircraft. So I just kind of time built in the light sports, and then I found a 152 that was IFR rated and everything, and I just went and did my instrument rating in that. I did my commercial in that because at this time that was when they had that accident in Florida where they got rid of the complex time that was required.
Yep.
They so they just made you have technically advanced and changed it over to that. So I just went and did it in this 152 that was a TAA airplane and took the commercial, took the full CFI the next day or something like that, and it was just super easy because for a lot of people for their CFI initial, it's a very difficult check ride. But I had been doing it already. You know, I had like I think 500 hours of dual given at that point, or maybe more. So me explaining, how an airplane flies, it's like I've done this all day. The ability to talk through something, I was like, I've already done all this. So it was really easy. And it was cheaper because of that. I literally just needed to get checked out in the plane. Then I would just go fly the maneuvers by myself and with an instructor a little bit and then just take the check ride and be done.
All right, so that brings us to the government contract gig. So around 700 hours or so, you hung up the CFI hat, so to speak, if I understand correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then you had the government gig where you were training the soon-to-be Air Force pilots. Like, tell us about that. How did that come about, and what was that job all about, and what the pay look like for that?
Okay, so I was kind of at the point, I was, I think, 26 when I started learning to fly. And I was like, okay, I can do this for a little bit, but I need some health insurance at some point. I need to like have an adult job.
Yeah.
So I was just looking all over the country. It actually was still a CFI job, but it was a government contract. So the salary was right around $90,000 a year, which again, 2018 was pretty, I mean, it's still pretty good now, but it was really good back then. It was in Pueblo, Colorado, and I just applied online and then didn't hear anything. I think I had 700 hours total time at the time. And I met all the requirements because the only requirement for this job was 100 hours of dual given. I had that. So didn't hear anything. So I went on LinkedIn and I found the HR manager's contact information. I reached out to her and we talked back and forth a little bit and it kind of didn't go anywhere. So I was going to Colorado to visit my brother who was stationed at Fort Carson. And I told her, hey, I'm going to be in town. I'm going to come down. And I basically just kind of forced an interview on them. And they said, oh, well, if you're here, we'll interview you.
Yeah.
So went out, did a flying interview, and they hired me. So I moved to Colorado and started working in Pueblo, Colorado for initial flight training and screening for the Air Force and Marine Corps. They fly the Diamond DA-20. So this is for like zero aviation experience. They kind of get them the equivalent of like a private, and then they move on to UPT where they start to fly the T6 and they do acrobatics and all the cool stuff. But it was a great job. I mean, really high standard of training. The emergency procedure training that the Air Force gives is just top notch. So I learned a lot there. But again, I mean, I was able to live below my means and just save money while I was doing that. And then I went and just paid cash for my multi-engine commercial. Just got my MEI at the same time because I was like, why not? I'm familiar with the airplane and just was able to cash flow it. So that's kind of the route that I took, and it was really good. And again, when you're flying full time and you get in another plane, it's really easy
Hmm.
to pick something else up because you're really proficient. So it's cheaper.
Absolutely. So did the government job, you went from 700 hours to about how many hours?
I think
To
I had
25,
like
and then you got the
1400 at that point, or 13 or 1400. And then I came back to Georgia during COVID, which is where I'm from. And I just kind of worked again as a flight instructor. I did a lot of like contract jobs. I flew PC-12 and I did my own contract thing. So just kind of did the COVID thing, made it through COVID. And then I had 2,300 hours, I think, when I got hired by a Part 135 charter operator out of Boise. And I was always trying to get back to somewhere that had mountains and, rivers and all that stuff. So
was that Jackson?
no, it was a Western Aircraft.
Okay, Western, yeah.
So I worked for them for about a year and then moved over to doing the air ambulance thing. And that's where I've been ever since. So,
Cool. Well, so I don't know anything. We're going to finish up on the air ambulance topic because I know nothing about it and I'm curious. So tell me about life as an air ambulance pilot.
yeah, so we have a 7 on, 7 off schedule. So we work 7 days and then we have a full week off. Your schedule's set forever at the company that I work at, which is really nice. So you can just plan, 6 months out when you're going to be off. So, if I take a week off, I'll have three, off in a row for the summer or whatever I choose to do. We fly the Pilatus PC-12, which is a really fun airplane, and we go into a lot of smaller airports or whatever the need is. Like we'll go to, Salmon, Idaho, pick somebody up and take them to Salt Lake.
Hmm.
We have a lot of helicopters, so that's kind of our primary, but the helicopters can only fly VFR. So in Idaho and Washington and Oregon in the winter, that's tough to do. So the Pilatus moves a lot. So we go into all these like smaller airports. We do a lot of, LeGrand and Richland and all these other places and take them to Seattle, or we go to Montana, take them to Salt Lake. Because Idaho, I didn't know this, we don't actually have any level one trauma. So we have to take them to somewhere else that can accommodate them. But it's been fun. I mean, it's a very challenging level of flying. I think the flying that we do is like one step below like Alaska bush pilot kind of thing. I mean, you really have to be paying attention. You have to read every single NOTAM. So we're very careful with what we decide to take, and it's always just on the pilot if we accept the flight or not. We're not pressured at all, and we have no repercussions if we turn a flight down. So I think that's also really, really important in the air ambulance space.
Yeah, no kidding. And so when you have the 7 day shift when you're on, are you flying all of those 7 days, or is it only when, an accident happens that you get called? I mean, how many hours are you typically getting on a 7 day stretch?
In the winter, we fly all of it. In the summer, we might sit around a little bit more, but we have just whenever we get a flight request, they'll call us, give us the information, and then we'll look at the airport and everything and decide if we want to take it. So this last week, I flew 7 of the 6 days. Most of those days, I did two transports a day.
Hmm.
So we do 12-hour shifts. So I would get there, at 9 in the morning, and I would fly the whole time, basically. And we can go to 14 hours, per FAA 135 rules, and we will do that during the day shifts, just as need be to complete a transport. We don't do it at night just because the company's like, that's probably not safe to push it that hard.
Do you have to take shifts on the backside of the clock, the graveyard shift, or you do?
Yeah, so that I would say is the one downside of this job is we work half of it is nights. So we work days and then we work nights the second half of the week. And
Hmm.
it's a little tough to switch. But again, I mean, we have fatigue timeouts, we have a risk management thing that we fill out. And if we get to a certain point where it's over a certain point score, we talk directly to the chief pilot. So there's a lot of risk mitigation in place.
Yeah.
And we can always turn something down. The last flight I had, we were coming out of Seattle. We had a really challenging patient, so the medical crew was tired, and they had to be, monitoring things every 15 minutes. And they called us for a flight. We had time for it. The weather was completely clear in VFR, and I just said no because we're going to be tired. So, and they said, okay, we totally understand.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right. So before we conclude today, given your knowledge and experience about the light sport route, is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you think that people really need to understand? I know you've got your ebook. I think is we'll put a link down in the description so people who want to get that can get it. But is there anything that I really should have asked you about that I did not?
Okay, so this is the one thing is how do you get students? Because most people want to get a private pilot's license.
Yep.
There's a whole other world of people who would probably start to fly, but they just don't know this is a thing. And because of that information being out there in Florida, a lot of people did because this school just explained it to the community. So I actually have a couple people that I've spoken to in this area of Idaho, and one of them is at a community college where she was quoted 18 months to be done with all of her flight training. And it has been 20 months, and she has a private pilot's license, and she is almost out of money. And I think that's criminal.
Yeah, I agree.
So I sat down with her, we had coffee, and we talked about this. And it's, we're going to try to find a light sport in this community. We have another person that would be interested in instructing in it as well. And from there, just trying to find students is basically, just talking to the local schools and anybody that comes in and is interested in learning to fly. And, they can't have anything that would disqualify them from a medical. But if they don't want to go get a medical and they have a driver's license, then they are allowed to do the light sport route. So once you kind of get a couple students through word of mouth, as I'm sure you probably have more students than you can even accommodate right now.
Hmm.
people will gravitate towards good instructors that are, have open availability and get them trained. So when I was working in this space, I had no issue finding students. People just don't know about it. The local community trying to learn to fly doesn't know about it, and the instructors don't know about it. So I think it's as easy as find a light sport at the local airport you're at, talk to that owner, and see if you can instruct in it, and just start from there, and then it'll kind of grow.
It's funny that you mentioned that. That was literally the one thing that I had written down here on my paper, but then I forgot. And as luck would have it, one of my newest students, who's a good buddy of mine, who sold a business, he is, at my advice, looking at buying a light sport,
Mm-hmm.
which he would then make available to me to teach other students in. So if you are watching this, regardless of where in the world you are, if you have interest in training with Trent here in Boise, he has not acquired the aircraft as of the time that we're recording this, but he's having a very close look at doing so. So make
Mm-hmm.
sure you head on Fly with Trent and send me a message on however you would like, either on YouTube or on Instagram or wherever you find me. And that might be an option for you at some point in the relatively near future.
Absolutely. I think it's a really good option. I think it gets people into aviation a lot less expensively, and it also helps people that are trying to become professional pilots, and that's what it's all about for me.
And that's why we did this interview. And that's why, on behalf of the Fly with Trent community and myself, Kaity, I want to thank you very much for coming and making the time and sharing your experience and your knowledge with us. Again, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I will make sure that there is a link down in the description to the ebook that you've created, so that people can get a lot more of the details if they are inclined to do so. So, again, on behalf of everybody, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.